Okay, so this is the VM Workstation interface when you first open it up. And again, I think the latest edition is VM Workstation 9. I'm working on VM Workstation 8, but I think that uh, that they're similar, at least in appearance too. Again, even if you went back to VM Workstation 7 or 6, the concepts, they haven't changed any of the concepts of VM. They've added more bells and whistles, and they've made the UI pretty, more pretty than the old ones. So let's just first talk about this concept of virtualization. Um, it's really kind of the key concept, probably in computing, uh, within the last 5 or 6 years. And VMware has been the leader in this area of virtualization. So it's not only caught on. We're going to be just working with the workstation where we're virtualizing machines on a local machine, and really the real importance for this for an IT professional to allow us to actually virtualize machines on a laptop or another desktop really is to provide you with this kind of test bed. Okay, so in the enterprise, what you'll often see is IT people will be running VM Workstation, and what they'll be doing is they'll be, testing, putting their enterprise software on that, exploring new pieces of software, because they're not going to want to roll this out on their production environment before they test it. I mean, that's always one thing that they're going to do. So the other thing is it's just used for learning things and trying things, because what you're going to see is what we're going to eventually do is we're going to set up a client server network that's isolated within our local machine within VM Workstation, and that environment is closed, meaning we can actually close it where it has no effect on the rest of the network. So, for example, we're going to install Active Directory. Well, if I was on a production environment and I went to a computer and I just started installing Active Directory, and there was another, the production environment was also running Active Directory, there would be problems. All right. Or if I was going to play around with DNS or DHCP, if I was going to try to figure that out or do something new or whatever, I wouldn't want to just go ahead and just start testing on my production environment. What I want to do is test it in a testbed environment. Now, from what I'm a big, strong believer in, from a student's perspective, and this is one of the reasons I show it and go into it in such depth in these next 3 weeks for VMware, is that giving you this ability and having you understand this early on in your academic career is going to allow you to set this up and then have a test bed going forward. So, we work a lot in lab sims, and lab sims are great, and you'll do lab sims in a lot of the classes, and they provide a good, what I call kind of the simulated environment that allows you to learn where things are, what to click on, how to do something. But oftentimes what you still want to do is you want to do it in the real thing, even though the simulations have gotten so good where it feels like, and you really are actually doing it on the real thing in the simulations. It's just that it's not a full blown version. So what I often suggest is that you will or might want to, as you progress through your career, academic career, is, okay, I learned this in class. Now I'm going to go home and I'm going to try to implement this in my, virtualized network. And, I know I've said this probably 10, 15 times throughout this course of this semester, but you guys are lucky. Because, again, to do some of the things that you're capable of doing now with really just the limitation of RAM, which is easily fixable in most computers, used to take multiple pieces of hardware. So, like when I was first learning networking, I would end up having to acquire, multiple pieces of hardware. Now, the good news for you guys is hardware has gotten a lot less expensive, and you can get used computers or pick up stuff from eBay and all that kind of stuff for relatively cheap. but it's still kind of a pain because then you're working with two keyboards and or a KVM switch or something like that that makes it a pain. Now with software and operating within these virtualized environments, you can just sit behind one decent computer and operate 3, 4, 5 virtual machines at a single time and kind of mimic this. Now, we're not going to be setting up 4 or 5 machines, but when you guys, for the networking people in here, when you take ITnet 157, which is VMware for the enterprise, which is vSphere, which I'll talk about a little bit in comparison to this, you'll be running like 5 machines simultaneously, okay, and all within one environment. So it becomes an incredibly great learning tool for you moving forward to be able to virtualize these environments. When you get to your projects, Pat has you do a lot of this stuff in for the networking people in VMware. It's great for screencasting, for setting up something in screencasting. It's great for testing certain applications and software. It's a good place to explore things if you're exploring things that might get you in trouble with viruses or malware because it's isolated in it. So there's a lot of things. Security students, you can do packet tracing, you do all that stuff locally. I mean, it's all really cool to be able to just sit there behind one machine and do this. So the keys, the fundamental keys that are behind virtualization is the machines that we create are hardware independent. Okay? So if I were to give you a Windows 7 disk and you were to go home and install it, or we were all to go home and install it, what would end up happening? Would it be the exact same install, or what would happen as we installed Windows 7 from scratch on all the different PCs we have in here represented at home? What would we have to do before we did that, or at least after we did that, what would we have to do? Yeah, we'd have to update, but then we'd also have to go and find the appropriate drivers that are peculiar to our hardware, right? Now, Windows might find the generic ones, but we might all have different graphics cards. Some of us might have AMD, some of us might have NVIDIA, some of us might just be using the built-in Intel video. So all that's going to require different drivers in order for that to run. If I were to take my hard drive and take it over to one of your houses and plug it in and take out your hard drive and boot up the computer, might it work? It might work, but if it works, what will happen is it is still going to sit there and say, we recognize new hardware, we recognize new hardware, we recognize new hardware. And depending on the motherboard, you may have to reinstall drivers to get it for the motherboard, but it's not advisable to do that. Hard drives aren't interchangeable in that way. I would say for the long haul, even if it does work, you're probably going to have a flaky computer eventually, and that you would be forced to eventually do what we call a clean install on the hard drive, right? That would be for that computer. So virtualization, though, gets around this. Virtualization, when we create a virtual machine in here, for example, it's hardware independent. And you can take that VM and you could put it on a removable hard drive, and you could take it home and you could boot it up in Windows in VM Workstation, and it would be no biggie, right? Because all of that stuff is virtualized in the software in Workstation. So it's a hardware independent, which then makes those VMs mobile. And what I mean by mobile is you can take them and open them up elsewhere, as long as you have VM Workstation in order to do that or accomplish that. Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's say you're doing this at home in your laptop. And then you log on to the VMware site because the student's got a VMware site, right?
Well, you download VM Workstation, which is the software, the client. Yeah. Sure. The so so anyways, the this idea of virtualization then is that's one of its biggest features. All right, is it's hardware independent. So, like I said, next week if you bring in removable hard drives, you'll be able to copy both ISO images, which you can get from MSDNA, and download. But we also have some of them on the hard drives in here. But for online students, you can download these ISO images, and we'll talk about what an ISO image is in a bit. And or you could actually save your VMs and copy them and take those home. Now, I usually don't license any of my VMs. So for Windows, for example, you can run Windows Server. Well, first of all, you get full functionality. You can run any version of Windows. Windows 2008, Windows 7. I'm not sure about Windows 8 because I haven't installed it yet. But I think it's the same way. You get 30 days to use it without having to license it, right? But even after those 30 days, it'll just pop up and say, this is an unlicensed version, and you could still use it, right? But it won't allow you to get any updates. It won't allow you to do anything like that. But for testing purposes, that's usually sufficient. The other thing is, you can always just reinstall Windows again. And what you're going to see is that to install a virtual machine after we do it today from an ISO image is no big deal. Okay? I mean, it doesn't take that long. So I personally wouldn't use, especially the licenses that you get from MSDNA, to license your VMs. Because once you license the VM, that's the license. That's it. It's just like licensing a machine that's sitting on top of a piece of hardware. There's no difference. It uses up that license. Microsoft, in the end, Microsoft considers it a license. I mean, and that's it. They don't distinguish between a virtual machine and a physical machine. So once you're done licensing it, you'll be done licensing it. So now you do have multiple versions or copies of Windows that you can get from MSDNA, but I would either just keep running the unlicensed version. There's also ways to extend the licensing to like 120 days. If you look up on Google, where you can extend that 30-day initial license to 120 for if you again look it up on Google. There's ways to do it. It's not really legal. You're just extending it. And then the other thing is with your textbooks, when you start taking Windows, the Windows classes, you will get copies. I think come with your. I think they still come with your textbook for a 120 or 180 day evaluation copy of server and Windows and things like that. So you could always use that and then just reinstall that after 120 or 180 days or whatever it is. So I definitely, we're not going to license key. We'll only be working with these virtual machines for 2 or 3 weeks, so we're not going to license key code them. Okay. Now the other thing about virtualization is that we're working with it on the client and VM Workstation. There's also, when you take the ITnet 157 class, there's a version of VMware called ESXi. All right, and ESXi runs on bare metal. So for example here, to run VMware Workstation here, we need to run it on an underlying operating system, right? I mean, we can't run VM Workstation just on a piece of bare metal. And we can't use it as, it needs Windows in order for it to operate. ESXi doesn't. It's actually an operating system that's based on the Linux kernel. I think last time it was like 35 megabytes, very small, and that runs on bare metal for servers. And then what you end up doing is you end up logging into that client, to that operating system, and then that what allows you to do is install virtual machines on top of that. Okay, so in the enterprise, vSphere, which is the client that allows you to manipulate ESXi and add virtual machines, that's the virtualization environment that you see in the enterprise. And it's the same concept, meaning if I'm running multiple virtual machines in Workstation, it would be the same thing as running multiple virtual machines as in ESXi. And when you get to the ITNet 157 class, which is again for a lot of you is a ways off because it should be taken as a last semester class in the networking field, you'll see there's a lot of similarities. The concepts behind a VM, a virtual machine, either running in the enterprise or running in Workstation, is identical, basically, right? Except there's a lot of other cool things that you could do. The hardware is a lot, you're running them on server hardware where you're talking about gigabytes of RAM and 50, 60 virtual machines maybe running on a server. And then there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with backing up and those kind of things within it. But the concepts, the actual idea of a VM and the way it is managed to a certain extent is identical. Okay. So any questions on just the concept of virtualization and the advantages of it? Okay. So this is the interface of VM Workstation. And so what you'll see here is you have some options, and we're going to be talking about the first two options here, and the other ones are places to explore, eventually. Now I will say this: there's very good documentation on VM's website. So they have a manual for whatever version of Workstation you're using. And I'll show you this next week because I'll bring when we talk about the networking, the different networking options, I'll bring those up and show you it. But if I have I don't know if I have the latest, so I can always put it in Dropbox and post it to the Google Plus site. I'll do that next week because next week will be when I'm using it. But if you're more curious about things or you have questions, you go to the VMware website and download the PDF that has the documentation for this. It's a very good piece of documentation. It's very well written, spelled out, and would help you if you had questions or ran into issues on your own. Okay. So the first thing, this is unique to the classroom, but I want you to. What we're gonna do is today we're gonna create a new virtual machine from scratch. Okay. But you'll also notice here I have the option to open an existing virtual machine. So I mean, if I already and I'll show you this next week, if I already had an existing virtual machine, I could plug it in and I could basically pull it up off like a USB hard drive, or if I had copied it to the hard drive on the computer, I could open it up. I can connect to a remote server and open a virtual machine on a remote server. I could actually virtualize the machine that exists here, my physical machine here, if I want to. So I could actually virtualize, and again, you can imagine that this would be great in a testbed environment, right? If I have a computer, if I have my clients out there, right, and we have the existing image, I could virtualize that. I could then introduce the new piece of software that we're thinking about using, and I could see how it works, right, in my current configuration within the enterprise. So again, you'll very if at least even when I was in IT, it was starting to become, this virtualization from an IT perspective, not in the enterprise. But every conference I've went to since, the guys bring in their laptops and they're always running VM Workstation or Parallels if they're using a Mac, or Fusion if they're using a Mac, and they have their virtual machines. I've never seen somebody not have it for demonstration purposes, if they're testing software, demoing software, whatever it may be. Virtual Network Editor, we won't talk about this one specifically, but we will talk about where these preferences are found and where they change, and you'll see those today. Software updates, to update VMware Workstation. So what we're going to do is we're going to be creating a new virtual machine, and we can create a new virtual machine if I had the physical medium of my disk, my DVD drive. I could create and load an operating system just like I would normally on a regular old PC. Okay, I could do that. But we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to install from an ISO image. So the first thing I want, and again, this is unique to the classroom, but if you were at home and you downloaded an ISO image from MSDNA, you would store that ISO image in kind of the same way we do here. If you want to next week and you want to bring in a removable hard drive and take the ISO images that we already have downloaded here, that's fine. But let's find those first. So if I go to, and again, if I go to Start and go to Computer, yours is going to be a little bit different than mine. I believe you guys have 2 hard drives in your machines. Okay, so if you have a C and a D, right? So if you go to the D drive, I'm going to my E drive. You should have a folder called ITNet Gold. Do you have that? Okay, if you click on that, you should then have another folder called ISO Images. Do you see it? Is it there? ISO Installers, yeah. And if you click on that, what you'll see is some ISO images, right? Okay? So these are ISO images. These are images that you would download from MSDNA. They're also the same kind of image, like if you wanted to install Ubuntu, this would be an image you would download from the Linux sites. Now, anybody know what an ISO image is? Yeah, it's actually a bit-by-bit replication of the disk, of what you consider the disk. And again, you guys should start forgetting about disks, right? Because they're going away. You know, the physical media is going away. It's, you know, I mean, it's not. I don't even. I mean, Macs now don't even come with DVD-ROMs. You'd have to buy it specifically. So the iMac I just bought has no DVD drive. Apple distributes all their software through the cloud and installing it that way. So there, you could still go to the Apple Store and buy it on disk, but they're getting away from it. Microsoft, I think, eventually is going to be doing the same thing. And if you just, and what's the big controversy of gaming consoles right now and the next generation is how are they going to distribute the media? Are they still going to have DVDs? Are they going to have it digitally distributed but then require a DVD, or how are they going to do it? And they're already there. I mean, you can go, if you have a PS3, I mean, you can download the games. If you even Xbox, you can download the games. So we're getting away from this idea of having physical media. So an ISO image, though, would be that replication of what you would normally find on a DVD, a bit-by-bit replication on a DVD.
Okay. I had downloaded a program off of DreamSparks or whatever, and they said copy the ISO image to a disk.
Yeah, and you could, and that's because they're still walking you through like the old mentality, but you don't have to. You would have to copy it to disk if you wanted to install it on a computer, on a hard drive, take it and put it on a new computer, because they're not there yet. Microsoft isn't there yet where they have figured out a way to install over the existing operating system from an ISO image. But like Apple does it all the time now. Apple, when I upgraded to Mountain Lion, I didn't have a drive. I just went to the Mac store, bought Mountain Lion for $19.99, hit install. It installs it up. Now again, this was an update to the existing Snow Leopard or whichever one it was. And they did it. Microsoft's not there yet. They're still. So what they're saying by DreamSpark is they're saying copy this disk if you want to go and load it onto a physical computer, right? Because you need the medium to do that. But again, maybe the next thing for physical media will be you just get a USB stick, right? You plug in the USB stick, and that's what you boot off of. I mean, that's the solid state memory's a better media than DVD, and now you can get a 8 gig. I mean, the operating systems are under 8 gigs. You can get an 8 gig USB stick for what, $10, $15 or whatever. Yeah, I mean I don't even they're so cheap. So, and people give them away for free for the most part. So we're just getting away with that. But here, this is this is what you would end up downloading. And we do not need to. It's going to be faster to install our virtual machine from an ISO image than it would be to burn it from DVD. Or burn it to DVD and then install it from DVD. But I want to make clear that I could still do it from a DVD. Okay, I could still create a virtual machine from a DVD. It's just that for most part, it's faster and easier to do it from an ISO image. Okay, so the ISO images are here. So what we're going to be installing today is the Windows Server 2008 ISO, and so. Again, what you'll notice is, this is 1.7 gigabytes. If I go to my Windows 7, that's 1.66 gigabytes. So, these are the downloads directly from the ISO. These are all downloadable from MSDNA. If you want to, and you have a removable hard drive, and you want to copy these ISO images, feel free. Okay. On a removable hard drive, copy them. Don't cut them. Copy them. So don't take them. Okay. So then what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a new virtual machine, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on this, and a wizard comes up. Okay. And like all wizards, they will help us with this installation. Now, what I'm going to do is don't you click on this, but I'm going to show you when you click on custom. So custom, what you'll notice is I have different hardware compatibilities, and if I were to take a virtual machine that was created in an older version of Workstation, it would still work. It would have to though be configured for that version of Workstation, and it would prompt you through it. So I got 8. You guys will have 9. And then here's where we go ahead and install. And what you'll notice is, again, don't do this yet. I want to come back. I want to just explain this before we go. So if I was installing from DVD drive, I would choose this, and I would install my media, right? My Windows DVD or whatever it may be, and I could install it. Here is where I install from the ISO image. So again, what I would do is I would browse, I would choose that Windows Server 2008, I would say open, and now it's created. So again, if you were doing this at home, you would locate the folder wherever this ISO was installed at first. And then the third option is I will install the operating system later. And what this does is this creates a shell of what feels like or looks like a computer if you boot it up without an operating system installed. Okay? So it creates it creates all the files in the virtual shell for it, and I could, if I wanted to, come back and install a virtual machine in that if I choose to. Okay? But again, we're not going to do that either. So this is the method, the custom method, but they say use typical, and typical will do just fine for what we're going to do. So this is where you can walk through it with me. So we're going to click on typical, and you'll notice we skipped that screen that asked about, because they're just assuming that you're making this virtual image for the version of Workstation that you're using. But again, I have the option here to use a DVD drive, to install from ISO, or we'll install the operating system later. We're going to go ahead and install it from ISO, and we're going to browse, and you're going to go look for that Windows Server 2008 ISO image that was in that ITnet Gold folder on your D drive. Okay? Remember, it's on your D drive, so you have to go to Computer and go to and open up your D drive. Well, you go and find where you have this ISO image stored. Well, you would have downloaded it from.
I downloaded and I've downloaded VMware because I'm following you on my laptop too.
Yeah, well, you're not going to have it on your laptop. If you're doing it on the laptop, you're not. I mean, I would do it first on these PCs and then just do it at home on your laptop. You'll have access to it.
I would have to download the ISO.
Yeah, or copy the ISO to your laptop eventually. So okay, so does everybody understand this? So you can, if you have a removable hard drive, you could take these ISO home images with you and install them on your, put them in a folder and put them on your hard drive at home or on your laptop. Or you can, for online students or even all of you, you can also download these ISOs from MSDNA, right? And what I would remember, when you download the ISOs from MSDNA, don't delete them after you're done using them. Store them. I mean, put them in a folder, call them ISOs from MSDNA, and put them on your hard drive or back them up onto a removable hard drive, and because you'll have them then to do this if you want to create more virtual machines at any time. And then you don't have to re-download the ISO from MSDNA, and depending on your internet connection. I'm okay, I'm fine, but for people that have a slower internet connection, it might take a longer time to download that ISO image. So we're going to be first installing Windows Server 2008. So what it should say then is it should say Windows Server 2008 is detected, and the operating system will use an easy install. Now, what that means is, in the old days, what it would do is it wouldn't recognize what the ISO was, and you'd have to say what version of Windows it was, or what version of Ubuntu, or something like that. Now, for the most part, the software recognizes it. So then we're going to click on Next. And here again is if I wanted to license this copy of Server, I would put in the license key code. But what I've told you is that in regards to creating a virtual testbed environment, you don't have to worry about this. You'll get nagged once in a while to key it, but you have basically 30 days of full usage, and then even after 30 days, it'll just say, non-genuine copy of Windows, and you wouldn't be able to get any Windows updates or anything like that on it. And but for what we're using it for the kind of learning the basics, especially initially, that's not the case. But if I wanted to, and I had the license, I could license it, put in the license key code here now too. Now here's a couple things about Server. We'll talk more about Server, as we progress. But Windows Server comes in different flavors. Right? So you'll see here it's Data Center Core, Enterprise, Standard Core, etc. In the real world, right, the license, right, would match the version of Windows Server that you were installing. Okay? And on the physical media, or in this case, on the ISO image, right, the operating system of all of these are on there. And that's why I can choose. Okay? In the real world, if I chose right now Enterprise, right, and I didn't key code it right now, and I went back and tried to key code it as a standard, it wouldn't allow me to do it. See what I'm saying? So if in the real, and what I'm saying is it really is a moot point to us, but in the real world, what I chose here, and if I didn't license it at this time, I would have to match it. If I wanted to license it in the future, I would have to license it with the appropriate license, either Enterprise, Standard, whatever it may be. Okay? It wouldn't allow me to do that. So I would end up having to delete the VM and start over and license it for the appropriate one I did. For us, again, in this environment, it's not that important. But when you get to, it's the same thing in vSphere and ESXi. And obviously there, you will be licensing, not maybe in the classroom, but in the real world, you would be licensing your servers. And you would need the appropriate license for the appropriate version of server that you're using. So for us, we're just going to choose Enterprise. Okay. And then what it allows us to do is to create a password and our full name to log in. All right. So we're just going to keep it as admin, and we're going to use what I still always do is, because you guys know the password, and don't use a different password for this, because if you come in next week and you can't log in, so be it. All right. So password 01, capital P, password 01, capital P, password 01. Then I'm going to check the box that says log on automatically. Okay, so make sure you use capital P, password 01. I'm going to click next. And then what it does is it warns me. It says you did not enter a Windows product key. Windows will install without one, but you must be manually activated later. Would you like to continue? And for our case, yes. And then what it does is it shows me Windows Server 2008. Now I already have a Windows Server. I have to delete it on there. That's why it's giving me this 2 here, because there's one already in there, and I didn't go back and delete it. But then what it does is it automatically stores it in a folder under your documents and virtual machines. So again, if I go to my documents and I go to virtual machines, there's the ones that I installed from last semester, which I'll delete. Actually, I can delete them now, then I won't get confused. Okay, but this is where eventually those virtual machines will be hosted. Okay, and again, if I wanted to, I could change this to whatever folder or directory I wanted to. But that's the reason I had you create your own profiles, was so that these would go into your My Documents folder on here. So for the purposes of us, we're just going to keep it at the default and continue. I'm going to click Next. Now here's another setting. And again, a lot of times if you read what's in front of you, it helps. The virtual machine's hard disk is stored as one or more files on the host computer's physical disk. These files start small and become larger as you add applications, files, and data to your virtual machine. The recommended size for Windows Server 2008 is 40 gigabytes. Now, just off the cuff, does anybody know by just generally how many gigs are required for a Windows Server install? Is it 40? No, it's like 2 or 3. So what they're saying is, remember, this machine will grow. The important thing about choosing this number, right, is that this would then be the maximum size that virtual machine could grow to. Okay? So you're going to see with a virtual machine, I could add, I could put pictures in it. I can add more I can install other applications. I mean, it works just like a regular machine. But as I do that, the space grows. And so what this would eventually grow to, or could grow to, would be 40 gigs. Well, we're not going to be doing any of that. We're not even, we're not going to be installing anything on the virtual machines. So we're going to actually change ours to 20. Okay. We don't need that amount, that much size to take it up. And then the other thing is store virtual machine as a single image, single file, or split the virtual disk into multiple files. Splitting the disk makes it easier to move the virtual machine to another computer, but may reduce performance with very large disks. We are going to choose, because we're not, again, going to be doing a lot with this virtual machine other than operating it as a server and a client, and with a client and creating a domain and all that. We're not going to be doing all that much with it. So we're going to store it as a single file. Plus, when I go and show you how this looks and where it's stored, you're going to be able to see that it's easier to look at as a single file. All right. Then I'm going to click Next. And what you'll notice then, it gives me all of my settings that I put in there. It actually has the ability to, if I wanted to, customize my hardware. We're going to come back through to these settings after the virtual machine, but just be cognizant that if I wanted to, I could make those changes here before I actually created the virtual machine. I'm then going to click Finish, and what will happen will be an install of Windows Server. Now, what's great about installing off an ISO image is that uh, it will probably install fairly quickly because we're installing from a hard drive, and even though hard drives are slow, they're faster than optical media.
Mine just asked, my computer here just asked about something about a hook timeout value. Yeah.
Um,
They just want us to reset it.
yeah, just say okay. I've never seen that error. Okay, so then what ends up happening is we go into a install of Windows, and I'll wait for you guys to catch up. But I mean, this is now what would normally look like if I put a DVD in my drive and I boot it up and boot it off the DVD. I would be installing a version of Windows. So I'm going to uncheck automatically activate online because we're not going to activate it. I do not have a product key, so when I click next, I'm going to get nagged again. But I'm going to just go ahead and say yes. I'm sorry, no. And yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't read. I'm here. I'm not reading. Yeah, and so now what it's going to do is, again, if you've ever installed Windows before, this is just like a Windows install. Um, it's going to start copying the files. The only thing is that hopefully it'll take a lot less time than it would if we were doing this off a DVD-ROM drive.
So we just push next when off the product key.
Yeah, press next.
Then no.
Yes, and then no. So again, it just jumps to 100. Uh, I don't know why it doesn't show progress. Why all of a sudden it just goes from 0 to 100, but it does. This will show some progress, but it shouldn't take that long, does it? No. What do you mean? No, it'll take, because we're installing off the hard drive. It'll be faster than if you did it from a optical media. Because even though the hard drive is slower, it's faster than optical media. So, well, no, not the install. If you're installing from an ISO from a hard drive, it's going to take a shorter period of time than it would if you installed from an optical. Um, but I mean, everything else. I mean, it's still the same installation. I mean, yeah. If you're asking me, are the steps of the installation identical? Yes. Yeah, the steps of the installation are identical. So if you were doing this off an optical drive on a Blade server, it would be the same thing as what we're going through now. So there we go. It's going to restart just like it would normally. It's going to, again, now, just the most important piece in virtualization for the performance of the virtual machines and the limitation of how many virtual machines you can run at one time is what? Anybody know? What piece? Huh? RAM. RAM. So the I'll show you this when we get to it, but the virtual machine reserves and takes up a part of your RAM on your physical machine when you use it. So, I mean, if you have it shut down, it's not taking it up. But when it's turned on, right now, as it installs, it's capturing or using a portion of your RAM. And I think the default for this was 1 gig of RAM. All right. So when you use virtual machines, and if you use multiple ones, so if we're going to end up installing 2, we're going to be using a portion of our physical memory on our machines to run those virtual machines. So at home or on a laptop, to run 2 virtual machines, 8 gigs of RAM, you're fine. I mean, and if you're buying a computer or you're building a computer or whatever, you're not going to buy or build a computer anymore without at least 8 gigs of RAM. And I would suggest you get 16 if you bought a new machine or you built a new machine or you upgrade your RAM. I would always now suggest 16 gigs of RAM. Okay, and with 16 gigs of RAM, you could run 5, 6 virtual machines and probably have no problems, no issues with it. But if you're operating with less than 8 gigs of RAM on a computer and trying to do this, so if you had 4 gigs of RAM, remember if you were running 2 virtual machines and they were eating up 2 gigs of RAM, that would leave only 2 gigs of RAM left for your actual local operating system, which is like the bare minimum that you possibly could run Windows on. So you would not have very good performance of both the virtual machines and the physical machine underlying it. So if you are buying or purchasing or planning on upgrading your computer, don't skimp on RAM, right? 8 gigs minimum, and I would suggest 16. The nice thing about this is RAM has become so cheap, right? I mean, you can get 16 gigs of RAM, dual match, DDR3 for $89 or something like that. And that's if you're running less than 8. That upgrade, if it's a relatively new computer, is one of the best upgrades you can make. Okay, but don't purchase a new computer or build a new computer without probably putting in 16 gigs because everything we're doing is just if things virtualize, working in the cloud. I mean, all this kind of stuff where you're multitasking and doing all these different things. That RAM is the best bang for your buck to help your computer operate at its maximum. So there it goes. So it's installing Windows, preparing my desktop. I mean, really painless, right? I mean, half the time you could have been walking away or doing something else, right? Clicking through as you went through it now. I mean, it's not, you could be reading a book or surfing on your laptop or answering your text messages or whatever it may be. So it really is not that difficult to do that. Now, when all this stuff pops up on your Windows server, I just want you to close it. So we'll come back to that. Now, the other thing that you'll notice is it's my, and this should happen automatically. You'll notice right now my cursor is kind of, it's not a pleasant experience to operate within the VM, right? You'll notice here I'm outside the VM, cursor much more responsive. Here it's not. And what will happen, hopefully, is automatically it will install these VMware tools on your machine when it reboots. And those VMware tools are going to do a lot. Let's see, there's a mouse driver. You can already see my cursor's a little bit better. But let it install. If it doesn't, by default, install VMware tools, you would install those VMware tools up here. So it would say right here, install VMware tools. Well, it's already installed VMware tools, so now it asks me to reinstall VMware tools. But if for some reason it doesn't install, you would see up here, install VMware tools. On all your virtual machines, you want to install your VMware tools, okay? Because you'll see now when my machine reboots, I'm going to have a much easier, my cursor is going to be, look at it, it's going to be a much more smoother experience, and it's going to offer some other functionality too, both behind the scenes and your ability to work within the virtual machine. Yeah, just close the stuff that pops up. And did it install VMware tools?
Yeah.
Okay, it did. Yeah, whatever server manager, things like that pop up, just close those. We're not going to worry about. We're not going to deal with that stuff today.
Shutting down.
Yeah, it's going to restart after it installs VMware tools. But you'll notice now, right? I don't have any of that lag that I had previously, and I know that my VMware tools are installed because when I go to the VMware setting, it says reinstall, which means that I now know they are installed. Okay, and I'm going to go through more stuff, but that's it. If you get the ISOs, if you download Ubuntu or you download a Linux distribution, it'll come and download as an ISO. You go through the same process. It's the same thing. Windows Vista, old Windows XP, the stuff you can download from MSDNA. And this machine right now, okay, is another machine on the network. Now, what you should do, or at least what you should probably be wondering about right now is, well, what is my IP address? So if I go to ipconfig, or the command line, I can run an ipconfig. And what you notice is I'm getting a 169.254.126.4 address. What address is that? No. But when I get a 169 address on a computer, what does that mean? That's that. Yeah, that's the automatic IP address that's assigned when it can't find a what? It can't find a DHCP server, right? The DHCP server is what distributes. Now, we're not going to worry about this. We're going to go ahead and before we leave today, we're going to put a static IP address on here. But I could also, and I'm going to show you where you can change these settings. You can change the settings to see the IP address. And remember, I'm doing ipconfig within the virtual machine. So I'm in the virtual machine and I go to command prompt. I'm not doing ipconfig from my local machine.
What do you write? Just ipconfig?
Yeah. So I go to, it's just like a regular machine. I go to start, command prompt, and I type in ipconfig. And you should have a 169 address. Okay. All right, but what we're gonna do, what I want to show you is I want to show you the settings of the virtual machine. And if I click down here on here's my hard disk, here's my drive, and if I click on one of those, I get this settings box pop up. And I click on that, and I now have my settings. I'm in my virtual machine, and on the bottom here, you'll see these little flashing, these icons here for hard disk, CD, floppy, network adapter, all that. If I just click on one of those, I get the settings box pop up, and I click on settings. Okay. So here are some of the settings that I can use. Okay. So remember when I clicked on when we were right before we were about to install the virtual machine, I had that advanced settings. Remember that? This is that same box that popped up. Okay. So there's going to be some things of importance here. First is memory. And what you'll notice here is that VMware allows me to change the amount of memory that's dedicated to this machine. So VMware recommends dedicating 1024 megabytes, which is a gigabyte. The guest OS 768, which would be not very much. And then I have maximum recommended memory. So this is 12 gigs. But what you'll notice is I could up my memory for this virtual machine if I wanted to, or lower it, right? And this is the amount of memory that is being used by this virtual machine. So this is configurable. I can change it. Now what's interesting is the newer versions of Workstation, you used to have the Workstation off in order to do this. And when we log off and shut them down, you'll see you'll have access to the same settings. But now it seems like they allow us to be able to do it on the fly. And that's something that you're able to do in ESXi and all that kind of stuff. So if I wanted to, I could change my settings. Now what we're doing and what we're going to be doing, the 1 gigabyte for our virtual machine is enough. Then if I click on processors, you'll notice that I have processors that I can dedicate. Right? And so this is a quad core. I'm not up. Do your guys' computer go to 8 processors? Does it? Yeah. So I forget what these are. If these are i7s or something like that. But again, this isn't really that of an important concept for Workstation. But when I'm in ESXi and working in vSphere, servers are going to have multiple right? They could have 32 processors. They could have 64 processors, right? And so I'm going to want to be able to dedicate the amount of resources. What you really have to get in the idea of thinking about is that the hardware within a virtual machine that's available on my physical machine becomes a resource for my virtual machines and can be distributed to my virtual machines. Really, in a nutshell, that's for this, and that would be for the VCP class, for the ESXi. Those are resources that need to be shared, right?
Okay, so if, let's say, for instance, I messed with the processors and turned it to 4, would that make things go faster?
Yeah, because you'd have more processing power dedicated to the virtual machine. But for what we're doing, you're not going to see anything different. I mean, again, if you were running like a SQL database or you're doing actually something that was processor intensive in that virtual machine, that's a different story. But for our purposes and for testbed purposes, we're not all that concerned. When you get to the ESXi model, right, that becomes incredibly important because servers take up different resources. No. You're still restricted by the actual hardware in your physical box, right? Now, I mean, remember that. Now, again, since now you kind of start getting the idea of virtualization. Remember, in an enterprise environment, one of the big key things that's happened, and the reason VMware and Microsoft has a version of enterprise virtualization that's baked into Server 2008 and Server 2012. It's called Hyper-V, and they give it away for free. They're trying now to catch up and compete with VMware. But remember that the whole idea of virtualization, and again, it's not that important with what we're doing, but in the enterprise, in the data center, right, you have these servers running, and many of the times they're not fully utilizing or even coming close to utilizing the processing power that they are configured with, right? So in the old days, the way we thought about servers is, okay, I'd have my web server, I'd have my SQL server, I'd have my authentication servers, I'd have all that. But like, for example, authentication servers or servers that authenticate, when are they busy in an enterprise environment? Right? When do people authenticate on the network? Yeah, when they come in the morning, right? Everybody's logging in. Even email servers, right? In the enterprise, if I come in, the email servers are probably hit hard at first morning, right? When everybody's downloading and looking at their email and all that kind of stuff. But then the demand, the stress put on that server becomes much less, right? Authentication would be the same way, or if you're running a SQL, I mean, who knows? So what ends up happening is a lot of that processing power, that processing power that you had, and the memory that you have in that server goes unutilized. So by virtualizing multiple computers on physical hardware, that physical hardware can be maximized for its usage with the that's half of what VMware you're doing in a virtualized environment is you're figuring out, okay, how am I maximizing the use of my hardware and my servers? The other thing is, if we just keep adding physical machines to take care of our servers, well, there's an energy cost, right? There's a cooling element. There's a space element. And this is why virtualization has become so popular, is because I don't need that. I can have one really big, good machine, and I can run my multiple servers on that one physical box and then fully utilize all that power in it, right? It's like me. I mean, it's like at home, right? I leave probably like 3 computers running at home. A Mac, a desktop. I mean, they go to sleep, but they're running, and a laptop. But are they being used right now? No. But that's processing power. Again, in the old days, and it's kind of funny how things just, Larry Dominy talks about this, but how things kind of go full circle. In the old days, when I was a graduate student at UWM, we were on mainframes. So we'd have terminals, right? And we go to the terminal. And what you were basically doing was I was doing all my statistical analysis, not on a Windows machine, but on a mainframe. And I would end up having to submit mine, and then sometimes they'd have to be put in a queue, right? Because I was reserved for the use of the mainframe. But the mainframe was constantly being used. I mean, in the old days, when only mainframes existed, and you had them big, beefy mainframes at educational institutions and all that, that's what you'd pay for. You'd pay for the amount of time you were using the physical resource of the computer, the processing of the computer, right? That's what you'd actually pay for. So we're kind of, because computing power became so cheap, and really is really, really cheap, right? We've now just become used to the idea that we don't have to maximize its usage all the time. I mean, even our phones, right? I mean, my phone sits here. It's capable, I told you guys it was, this is like 200 times more powerful than the computers they used for the moon landing. Well, this sits in our pockets and at our desks, all unused, right? I mean, what if I could say, okay, use this processing power all the time for, trying to find a cure for cancer or cracking the human genome or something like that. And there are things like that, right? There's SETI. You can download that SETI program, that will run in the background on your computer. And then when you're not using it, it'll download a little piece of data to look for radio waves or aliens, and it'll run it and then report it back. I mean, there's a cancer one. There's different ones you can do that, where you can basically utilize your dead processing computer power to some other cause that would be used, and that creates then like a big supercomputer, right? I mean, when you really think about it, all these computers, we have all this processing power. If I was an evil genius, right? I mean, what I would do is I would try to take control of all the computers, right? And then make it figure out how to do something. Who knows? And I'm sure they're trying to do it. And that's what hackers do. Hackers now, they don't try to go and erase your hard drive and do silly things like that. They just try to botnet your computer and harness it and then use it for malicious purposes. And that's all they're doing. So, I mean, that's kind of the key here. So then hard disk space, and you'll notice that this is where I set up my maximum size. My system size is free, and then the current size of 5.7 gigabytes. If I click advanced, what you'll notice is I have different modes here. But the problem is that I cannot, if I click this down when I had the machine off, I would be able to expand that if I chose to, but the machine needs to be off. Again, CD, auto detect. Here's my ISO image, connected power on. Floppy, auto detect. I typically, if you don't want to be nagged, you want to turn this off if you don't have a floppy disk, which most computers now don't. The big question is when will floppy be taken out of VM Workstation? That'll be the big question, right? Here's my networking, and we're going to come back to networking next week. This is where, if you want to look at the VMware documentation, there's a section on here that talks about this, and we'll go through that next week. But we'll come back and talk about the networking next week. My USB controllers, right? Sound card, printer, display, right? Now here's a cool thing, right? Here's if I click on Control-Alt-Delete here, what happens? That, right? And this is not my virtual machine. This is my local machine. So what you'll know is then VM will warn you. It says VM Workstation is detected a Control-Alt-Delete step inside the virtual machine. Even when the virtual machine is control of the keyboard and the mouse, Control-Alt-Delete is processed by the local machine. So what you either need to do is Control-Alt-Insert, or you can go up here and you can send Control-Alt-Delete. All right? Either Control-Insert, or you can go up to the VM tab and Control-Alt-Delete. And again, the password we created was password 02. I hope. Oh yeah, that's right. My bad. And there I am. Now here's another cool thing that you'll see is that here's my virtual machine. Right? Here's But here's a cool thing. If I have a local file here on my computer, I can do this. I can drag it, and I can copy it into the virtual machine. Now, I don't have PDF installed in there. That's why it's not showing up as a PDF. But I can put files in there. If I want to take this screen capture, put it in there. There it is. This one I'm going to delete. And I can only do that because of VMware Tools. But that shows you that this is just a regular computer. I can have files in it. If I wanted to, and I put a DVD-ROM in here with like Microsoft Office, it would recognize it in the virtual machine, and I could go ahead and install Microsoft Office in the virtual machine. Okay. Now, the other thing I want to show you is where these files are kept and what they're made of. So again, we know we stored it in documents and virtual machines. And here is that folder that was created. And here is my virtual machines, or my virtual machine, right? And what you'll notice is here it is. This is my hard drive. So this is what you would see getting bigger as I added to that virtual machine. This is also the folder that you would copy if you wanted to take that virtual machine, copy it onto USB drive, and open it elsewhere in VM Workstation. Okay. The other thing is that there's a file called virtual machine configuration, and if I open that with like Notepad, this is my ini file, or what I think of as an ini file. You'll notice that this is all my settings, right? This is what my Windows server was called, my display name, power type, power. I mean, when I make those changes in those settings, this is the file that it's changing in. Okay? I mean, if I wanted to, and I knew what I was doing, right? I could just change it here and not worry about changing it in the GUI. But when I change in the GUI, this is what I. So I mean, I think of it as an ini file, but that's kind of old school. It's a configuration file. It's ini. I mean, in a way, it's like I shouldn't even. I'll just leave it at that. I was going to call it a mini registry, but it's not. So yeah, it's sort of a mini registry for that VM. So if I wanted to, that's where my portability is, right? This, if I wanted to copy this, I would copy this whole folder, and that's what I would end up going in and opening up as an existing virtual machine. And I'll show you that next week, okay, when we go through that. Okay, so everybody understand that? Got that? Okay, know where that exists? Okay, so any questions so far? Everybody comfortable and feels comfortable that they could go home and install one of these virtual machines on your own? It's something that I suggest you do, okay? And then what we're going to do this week is we're going to change the IP address, and then next week we're going to come in and we're going to install a client, and then we're going to start with the networking part of it, okay? But I'm first going to, before we leave, we're going to set the static IP. So again, just like any other machine, we need to go in and find where we switch and set a static IP address. So I'm going to go into network. And then if I go to network and sharing center, then this should start looking familiar, right? Yeah, I went to network, and then I went to network and sharing. Okay. And then this looks more familiar. This looks like in Windows 7. If I go to manage network connections, there's my local area network card, right? And then I right click and I go to properties. And here's my TCP/IP version 4 settings. I go to properties, and what you'll notice is that right here it says automatically attain. Now what we're going to do, just to give you an idea, so next week when we come back, we're going to install Windows 7, and then we're going to come back and we're going to come back to server, and we're going to install Active Directory, and then we're going to establish physical connectivity between the server and the client. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a user. We're going to talk about what servers do and all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to create a domain. We're going to have the client join a domain, and we're going to create a user on the server, and we're going to log in as the user on this from the server onto the server, all within the virtual environment. And so basically, by the end of next week, and we'll talk about VMware network settings and things like that. By the end of next week, you will have the ability to create a client-server testbed environment that would mimic any enterprise environment, right? And that's what you're always talking about a server and a client. And if you wanted to play around with Exchange, you could go to MSDNA and download Exchange, load Exchange on the server, and set up Exchange or SQL or whatever you wanted to do. Or as you progress, if you wanted to test a piece of software, you wanted to play around with something, you'll have the ability to do that. Now, the only thing that and I'm going to be creating it within an isolated environment, meaning that your ability to get to the outside world is not going to exist. You can only operate within this virtualized environment. So, like for example, right now you cannot get out to the internet. I'll show you next week how to get out to the internet from the virtual machine. But what you'd have to do is you'd have to then create a third machine that would act as a router. And those are in my other videos. And again, I'll give you they're using old versions of Workstation, but the concept would be the same. Brian also made some videos, so I will have to see if those match up to what I want to do. So for example, so what we're going to do is we're going to use a static IP address. And we're going to use 10. Why isn't it typing in there? That's weird. I did. Oh, there. I thought I did. That's weird. We're going to do 10.1.1.1. I'm going to hit tab. That's again, you should by now know that that's a class A address and the default subnet mask for that. We're not going to worry about a default gateway because like I said, we're not going to be going to the outside world with this testbed environment. And this server next week will become a DNS server. So what we're going to do is point this to ourselves. And we're going to click on OK. We're going to click on Close. We're going to click on Close. We're going to click on Close, Close. And then I'm going to go and run ipconfig to confirm that I have my 10.1.1 address. Dislocated? Yeah, that's the other adapt. This is a virtual adapter. You don't have a top one? You don't have a 10.1.1? All right, I'll have to see after the class. Okay, so all we've done, I mean, again, is just set a static IP address on this virtual machine. Okay, that's all we've done. We're not obtaining from a DHCP. Can anybody guess what the IP address of the client will be? 10.1.1.2. If I did 10.2, that would be a different what? Yeah, it'd be a whole different subnetwork, right? Yeah. Yeah. You guys gotta, if you're, TCP/IP seems so far away, doesn't it? Yeah, in order to remain on the same subnetwork, I would have to use 10.1.1.2. If I went to 10.2.2.1 or something like that, that's a completely different subnet, and they wouldn't be able to communicate. Okay. So, any questions on what we did? Any questions on just the basic concepts of virtualization? Okay. Pretty cool, hey? And like I said, what I want to re-emphasize again and again to newer students, your ability now, once you learn all this and to be able to set up these test beds, is the stuff that you can go and play with, right? I mean, as you take classes, I can't. I want to know why this. You should hopefully have the natural curiosity of, well, I wonder how you do this, right? And then you can go figure it out now and do it. And the best way to learn, one of the reasons I like the lab sims, even though they're canned simulations, the best way to learn this stuff and the best way to internalize this stuff is to do it. And not only do it, but try to figure it out doing it. Okay? That is key. Again, I hate to sound like an old fart, but I used to spend hours and hours and more hours trying to figure stuff out. And I didn't have any of this stuff that now makes it so much incredibly easy to figure out. I did not have Google. I did not have VM Workstation. I did not have any of this stuff. So to have the excuse that this is hard, it just doesn't. To me, it doesn't. I don't buy it. It doesn't exist for me anymore. I mean, to have that excuse, but you have to have the drive and passion and the curiosity to try to figure something out. So when you hear something in class, or you're like, you go to work and you do this, and you say, I wonder what they're doing here. How are they doing it? You will now have the ability to go back home, open up your VMs, and try to figure it out. You'll probably be Googling at first, but you'll be trying to figure it out. And then once you do it and accomplish it, then wow, you'll never forget it. I shouldn't say that either. As you get older, you do forget things. But document then if you think you're going to forget it. Do a voice memo or written memo or screencast or whatever. But you have to sit down and do it. So, like I said, even though right now you're going to walk out of here, you're thinking, okay, I know how to do this, you need to still go do it on your own. And you'll have the screencast. If you have questions, you'll be able to walk right through it and see it again. But you have to do it on your own. And again, if you don't have the curiosity and you don't have the motivation to try it on your own, right, then you got to think long and hard. You really do. Because it should tickle something if you like this. The possibilities. It should be like, yeah, now I'm starting to get it. Yeah, now I can go start playing with TCP/IP and diagnosing network conditions. Yeah, now I can start figuring out and putting a firewall on, or playing with a third-party firewall and figuring that stuff out. Oh yeah, now I can put on Wireshark and maybe do some packet tracing between two machines and see what the packets are and how I would sniff that, or what's encrypted or what's not encrypted, or something like that. No, you have to run it locally on one of the VMs. Well, unless you had it going out to the internet. But I'm going to talk about those. The reason I like the closed testbed environment, well, especially like for example in an enterprise environment, you wouldn't want it interfering with your production environment, or if you screw something up, right? So you can set up I could set up a DHCP server on here, and I could have it access a DHCP server. I could also set up another computer and have it act as a default gateway that would allow my virtual machines to get out to the internet. I have videos. There's video, like I said, I'll post all these videos. And not that one. I won't post those yet. I just wanted to post this one this week. But I have other videos, but they're on older versions of Workstation on how to set up a third machine as your default gateway, which would then allow me to get my VMs to the outside world. And I'd have just like a normal default gateway. And it's pretty easy if you think about it. You just got to set up routing and remote access on that third machine to act as a gateway for that particular subnet. All right. Okay, so I'm going to end the screencast, and then if anybody has any more questions, remember the paper is due in 2 weeks, and you're doing 8.0 in the lab sim.